Hey, this is Glover Teixeira, UFC light heavyweight champion.
Hi, I'm Robbie Lawler.
What's up, fight family? This is your favorite MMA coach, Thiago Alves, the Pitbull.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Pedro Munoz.
This is Mike Brown.
Guys, I am Alexis and welcome.
And welcome.
And welcome.
And welcome.
And this is We Want Picks.
And you're watching We Want Picks.
To We Want Picks.
We Want Picks.
To We Want Picks.
To We Want Picks. Hi everybody from American Top Picks.
My name's Angelo and welcome to We Want Picks. I am going to break down the entire UFC Vegas 47 Hermansson for Strickland fight card. I'm going to give you my picks and my bets for every single fight on this card. If you want $50 free, go to wewantpicks.com/bets, sign up with any one of our 5 betting partners, and I will send you $50 for free from us to you as a thank you for supporting us and our partners. That's wewantpicks.com/bets. We have 5 partners. Jump into any one of them, make a deposit, let me know, and I will send you $50. Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, however you want it. Let's jump right into this card. We're about 2 weeks out from when this card happens, but there's no fights this week, so we're going to break it down nice and early. And first up, we have Alexis Davis versus Julija Stoliarenko. Alexis Davis is 20-11 overall. She's only 1-4 in her last 5. Stoliarenko is 9-6-1 overall. She is 3-2 in her last 5. She is coming off 2 losses in a row. And opening up this card, we have sort of a battle of the struggling bantamweights in what is probably a win or go home matchup. Alexis Davis is a busy striker who lands almost 5 significant strikes per minute. Unfortunately for her, she has hit just as much. She does do a nice job throwing in combinations and mixing up leg kicks, but historically, Alexis loses to the top women in the world, but she does beat pretty much everybody else. Her most recent losses are to Pani Khanzad, Viviane Araújo, Jennifer Maia, and Caitlin Chikagian, and they are all ranked in the top 10 right now, today. Julija Stoliarenko is one of those fighters that has fantastic jiu-jitsu, but no real wrestling. She only has a 12% takedown accuracy and is 1 for 8 in takedown attempts in the UFC. She does have a ton of submission wins, and they are mostly off of her back because she has phenomenal bottom jiu-jitsu game. Her striking is a bit sloppy, and she is very hittable. You can see here the negative striking differential of 3-2, but she is willing to brawl, and she does have heavy kicks. And I think this is where the veteran play is the best play. I like Alexis Davis to use her experience, use her fight IQ, and grind out what I think will be a pretty one-sided striking win. If it does end up on the ground, which I don't think it will because neither fighter has much to offer for offensive wrestling, I still think Alexis Davis can avoid the submissions if they end up there and then work from the top position to a decision. The one thing that worries me here is Julia's willingness to bang, and she does have really heavy leg kicks. Alexis Davis is 38 years old. She is starting to slow down, but I still think she will get it done, and she will grind out Julija Stoliarenko in a pretty one-sided, not very eventful, but a pretty clear victory for Alexis Davis. Next up at UFC Vegas 47, we have Sam Alvey fighting Phil Hawes in a pretty wild matchup, honestly. Sam Alvey is 33-16 overall. He is on a 6-fight winless streak. He hasn't won a single fight since 2018. Phil Hawes, 11-3 overall. He's 4-1 in his last 5, with that loss being a knockout to Chris Curtis just 6 weeks ago. And Phil is taking this on a few weeks' notice. So the question here is, A, has he recovered from that knockout loss? And B, what was his weight situation when he took this fight? Because he has not been in a camp. He took this on pretty short notice. And Sam Alvey, he gets a lot of leash with the UFC. He's on that pretty bad losing skid. He is fun to watch. He continues to get opportunities, though, and I think that's why, because he's fun to watch, and he's a really good test for a lot of these people. He will give people a hard time. If you look at those losses, they're not necessarily beatings, right? He's in those fights. He has deceiving power, very unorthodox striking. He can put you away with one of his weird looping shots, and he will always be in a fight. If he keeps it on his feet, he can honestly win this fight. But if it ends up a wrestling match, he's going to have a really long night against the very good national wrestling champion, Phil Hawes. As you know, Phil Hawes has very good wrestling. He's got a ton of power. He's incredibly explosive. He's coming off that KO loss to a much smaller Chris Curtis. But even with that fight in the books, I can say that Phil is improving his striking. He does have a ton of power in his hands. He looks better every fight. I actually think he was winning the striking exchanges against Chris Curtis before, he took the L there. But Phil is an incredibly high-level athlete, and every time he goes out there, it shows what an athlete he is. And this seems like a slam dunk for Phil Hawes on paper, but this is a really interesting fight to me. Because Sam, while he does have a miserable record as of late, he is incredibly tough. He has cardio, he has a chin, he has a willingness to just move forward and push a pace and keep people uncomfortable. Phil has had cardio issues in the past. He seemed to have taken care of them, but it will definitely get tested in this fight, as well as his chin. So Phil Hawes, historically, gets tired. But he fought Kyle Dawkins, seemed to fix some of those cardio issues. But listen, this is a short notice fight. I don't know what his weight was. I don't know what his mindset was. I don't know if his cardio is going to hold up in this fight. And Sam Alvey is so tough. He's such a hard guy to get out of there that I see this fight going a good amount of time. And Phil may end up absolutely exhausted. And that's what makes this a much harder pick than you would expect. I want to go with Sam here. And just like the logical part of my brain is like, are you a crazy person? Are you Sam hasn't won a fight since 2018 and that's the direction you're leaning. But the cardio has me worried. The grittiness of Sam Alvey has me worried. Phil Hawes coming off that loss. Like, yes, Chris Curtis is 10 times a striker that Sam Alvey is, but I don't know what that did to Phil Hawes' psyche. I'm going to pick Phil because he's just such an incredible athlete. He's the more dangerous fighter in this matchup because he's got the one-punch knockout power. He's got the wrestling threat. I'm going to pick Phil Hawes, but two things are going to happen. I'm going to watch the scale very closely, see what Phil looks like. And I'm probably going to put a wins inside the distance, decision, no action bet on Sam Alvey. And what that bet is basically if Sam Alvey somehow wins by stoppage, I'll get paid. But if he loses a decision because Phil Hawes just wrestles him and takes him down and beats him up from there, and he's very tough to put away, so I don't see Sam getting stopped. So if Sam loses a decision, I get a refund. It's like the bet never happened. I get a full refund. I get my money back. I love that bet. That prop hasn't dropped yet, but it will closer to the fight. I love that. I will probably place that bet on Sam Alvey. And if you want to place a bet like that, go to wewantpicks.com/bets. We have 5 partners. The one partner that offers that safety net wins inside the distance decision, no action bet is Bet Online. So if you go in there, make a deposit, let me know after you do, and I'll send you $50 as a thank you. Next up, we've got Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Carlston Harris. Rakhmonov is 14-0 with 14 stoppages. Carlston Harris is 17-4. He's 5-0 in his last 5, and he has his own little 5-fight stoppage streak going. Rakhmonov is special. He's one of those guys that when you watch him fight, you know he will do things in this sport. He's 14-0. He's got a 100% finish rate. He's knocking people out on his feet. He's taking people down and submitting them. He's even jumping to guillotines and getting those. He can literally fight anywhere. He's very hard to hit, and he also has a ton of power. He's got solid defensive wrestling and judo. He's very active when he gets to the ground. Shavkat Rakhmonov is a very, very versatile and dangerous fighter. Carlston Harris is also a well-rounded guy. He has pretty wild striking, but he has some power in there. He's a very slick opportunistic grappler as well, meaning he'll snatch up a Darce. He'll even snatch up a standing head and arm choke when he sees the opening. His wrestling is solid as well. He doesn't have traditional takedowns, but he has nice body locks and trips. And as soon as you hit the mat, he's working towards something. And this should be a really fun fight because Carlston loves to swing wild with his striking. Rakhmonov also has no issues getting into a firefight. Both guys are finishers. Both guys can make things happen on the ground. I understand the odds here with Rakhmonov being almost a 3-1 favorite, but I actually disagree with them. I think this is a really fun, competitive fight, and Carlston could absolutely pull off a win. In fact, I would argue that if this gets out of the first round, late second, starts to touch the third, Carlston might even take over. I will give a slight edge to Rakhmonov in this matchup because he can get it to the ground more effectively than Carlston can. But Carlston does have solid wrestling. He is undefeated in the UFC. He's currently 0 for 4 in takedowns in the UFC. And that is why I am picking Rakhmonov, because he does have some takedowns. He hasn't been able to put them together in the UFC. I think they're just going to be swinging wild on their feet. Rakhmonov will take it to the ground, and he'll be in control on top. They're both good grapplers, but whoever ends up on top is going to win sort of this fight here. So I love this fight. It should be a ton of fun. Rakhmonov's the pick, but I do think these odds are very wide. Then we have Malcolm Gordon versus Dennis Bondar. Malcolm Gordon is 13-5 overall. He's 3-2 in his last 5, coming off a win over the other Figueiredo brother. Dennis Bondar is 5-0 in his last 5. He's riding a 10-fight win streak, and he is 12-1 overall. Malcolm Gordon is a BJJ black belt with solid striking and a suspect chin. He has really high striking guard like this, and he likes to come forward, which in the past has opened him up for takedowns. But ultimately, that's fine because he wants to be on the ground. He averages almost 2 takedowns per fight. He has a low 18% takedown accuracy, but he does want these fights on the ground because he has a very solid BJJ black belt. Because of his chin, his path to victory in most fights is absolutely to get this to the ground. And Dennis Bondar is wild. He comes charging forward with winging punches in all directions. Then he drops to your legs, picks you up, and just old school Matt Hughes style walks you across and then dumps you down. Nice big heavy slams, and they are all very impressive. On the ground, he's pretty basic. He's very effective, but he's pretty basic. It's head and arm chokes, arm bars, things like that. So again, very effective. That's not a knock on him to say basic. He's mastered those basics. He's not going to be caught up in some wild X-guard scramble and then pull off a submission like that, but he will plot, throw up arm bars, work from position to position, and then get that done on the ground with just old school, solid, basic level jiu-jitsu. And Dennis Bondar is absolutely the pick here. He's absolutely the pick. Even though Gordon will have a speed and technique advantage on the feet, I think Bondar's wild punches will take Gordon out of his rhythm, and then Bondar's just relentless takedown attempts will absolutely get it to the ground, and then he should dominate from there. Gordon will definitely have the better jiu-jitsu just as far as, just well-rounded technique is concerned. I don't think he's going to be able to work anything with Bondar on top, though. This will be a great test for Bondar, but I do think he passes this test. He passes it with flying colors. I like Dennis Bondar to take down Malcolm Gordon, beat him up from there. I don't think there'll be a submission. There could potentially be a TKO on top, but I like Bondar to get this done. Then we have Bryan Battle versus Tresean Gore in a battle of the tough finale. This should have been the tough finale months ago, but Gore was injured, so he was out, and then Bryan Battle beat a last-minute replacement opponent. Bryan Battle is 6-1 overall. He's 5-0 in his last 5, and he's coming off of that Ultimate Fighter win. Gore, 3-0 overall, so he's only had 3 fights as a pro. If you include the fights in the Ultimate Fighter house, he's 5-0, although those are technically exhibition fights. Again, this was supposed to be the Ultimate Fighter finale matchup, but Gore was injured, so he was out, and then they replaced him with Gilbert Urbina, and Bryan Battle beat Gilbert Urbina to become the Ultimate Fighter champion. Gore is awesome. Tresean Gore is heavy-handed. He's come forward wrestler. Almost every fight he's in, he will throw big, heavy punches and immediately drop to the legs. He never stops doing that. He'll throw 3 or 4 punches, drop to the legs. If you stuff him and he comes back up, it's 3 or 4 punches again, and then drops back down to the legs. And it's effective because it's smothering. And if you can't come off the cage, you're going to lose a decision against the cage. If you can't stop the takedown, you're going to get taken down and beaten up there. And it's just an endless cycle that he gets you sucked into. Bryan Battle, he's coming off that Ultimate Fighter win. He is the Ultimate Fighter champion. He's a good striker. He's got solid volume, nice head kicks. He showed us in his last fight that his ground game is solid and he's never out of a fight. He has decent takedown defense, but he will be looking to use that and keep this fight standing. And this fight is actually somewhat similar to Bryan Battle versus Gilbert Urbina from the Tough finale. If you remember that fight, Bryan was not having a good night. He was not having a good night. He was on the wrong side of both striking and grappling exchanges, but he was tough enough to hang in there, and he ended up pulling off a submission win because Gilbert was exhausted. I think this will be similar in that Gore will be looking to get this to the ground. Gore will be just throwing those strikes and just relentlessly looking for takedowns, where Bryan Battle will look to strike. I think Gore will also have some success with the striking entries and definitely success with the grappling. I like Gore to win this fight, but Bryan Battle has proved himself to be incredibly tough and never out of any fight in any position. So it's a tough fight to have enough confidence to put money on, because these are 2 guys early in their career. I mean, Gore's literally only got 3 fights. So to stand here and say he is going to dominate, he's the real deal. The dude has 3 fights. So we need a little more time. But stylistically, I like Gore to throw those 3 or 4 punches, get Bryan Battle against the cage, take him down, work from there, repeat that cycle. Most likely a decision win for Tresean Gore. Then we have Hakeem Dawodu versus Mike Trizano. Hakeem Dawodu is 12-2-1 overall. He's 4-1 in his last 5, coming off a decision loss to Movsar Evloev. Mike Trizano, 10-1 overall, 4-1 in his last 5, coming off a solid underdog win over Ludovic Klein. Hakeem Dawodu is a high-level striker who throws everything with power. He sets a nice forward pressure pace and still manages to have excellent counter punches. He will walk forward throwing leg kicks and straights, and then when you fire something back, he just dips his head, sends something in your direction, and has an awesome, awesome counter-striking game. He's incredibly technical and has very real power. Mike Trizano is the 2nd Ultimate Fighter winner on this card. He's a fun forward pressure striker with some real power and lots of energy. He had a 2-year layoff, but then he came back last year and he beat Ludovic Klein in a pretty big upset. It was a close fight, and Trizano was actually taken down a few times, but he was able to steal the fight with a late power rally, a late submission attempt. He's a calculated striker who does a good job of mixing in power and speed. He puts his foot on and off the gas pedal really well. And the most impressive thing about his win over Ludovic was that he sat on the stool between, I think, the 2nd and 3rd round and said, I need to pick this up. And he went out there and he picked up the pace, poured it on, and stole that fight. And this should be another really fun fight on this card. We have 2 heavy-handed strikers that should absolutely deliver. I think Dawodu is the better, more powerful striker, but Mike sets a hard pace and doesn't gas. These odds are reminiscent of Mike Trizano's last fight, where he was a massive underdog and pulled it off. He had so much success in that fight that Ludovic Klein, the superior striker, started shooting takedowns to get himself out of those striking exchanges. I do like Dawodu to win this fight. I think the odds are a little wide, and I will probably find a bet for Mike Trizano, probably a +3.5 bet. And if you don't know what that is, you buy a round on the judges' scorecard. So all Mike Trizano would need to do is win 1 round on his own, and then I bought myself another round. So if Mike Trizano wins straight up, I'll hit my bet. If Mike Trizano loses a decision, but he won a round, I'll hit my bet. That's another bet that you're only going to get if you go to wewantpicks.com/bets. We have 5 partners. The one partner that offers that bet is Bet Online. So click, make a deposit, let me know, and I'll send you $50 as a thank you for supporting us and our partners. Again, the pick here is Dawodu, but I think this will be a close fight, and I think it'll be a ton of fun. And speaking of a ton of fun, we have Julian Erosa fighting Steven Peterson. Julian Erosa, 26-9 overall. He's 4-1 in his last 5, coming off a late submission win over Charles Jourdain. Steven Peterson is 19-9 overall, 3-2 in his last 5, and he's coming off that solid win over Chase Hooper. Julian Erosa is incredibly fun to watch. He is a very violent striker with a ton of finishes. He throws absolutely everything with intent, and even if he's a bit hittable, it's fine because so far his chin is held up. He has most of his success fighting at range, but he has no problem getting sucked into a firefight. He has solid MMA jiu-jitsu, meaning I don't know what rank his Brazilian jiu-jitsu would be if he was belted. And if it was in a tournament, he wouldn't do that well. But he mixes his jiu-jitsu in really well in fights. He sets things up incredibly well on the ground when he needs to. And we saw that against Charles Jourdain. But it's not something he looks for often. And he doesn't really get takedowns for the submissions. He gets them mostly to do some damage on the ground. Steven Peterson's a tough guy. He likes to strike. He showcased his submission defense in his fight against Chase Hooper, as well as his willingness to take risks and make a fight ugly. When we broke down Steven Peterson before the Chase Hooper fight, I said the way that you beat him is to point strike him. Get some volume, get in his face, touch him up, move around. And I think that's exactly where Julian Erosa shines. I will say Erosa had some trouble with Jourdain and Jourdain's striking style. And Steven Peterson is actually somewhat similar to that just come forward, make it ugly Jourdain style. But I still like Erosa to push the action, stay in Peterson's face, and get it done in a fun but ugly brawl. We may see one of them lean on their wrestling, and in that case, I would lean towards Peterson. But this is a great fight to live bet. So I like Erosa to win this fight. I'm probably going to hold off on a bet until I'm watching it live because, you know, I should know everything I need to know in the first minute or two. If Erosa's just in Peterson's face, touching him up, great bet, because that's the way the fight is going to go. But if Peterson's firing back, making Erosa uncomfortable, all of a sudden I might be able to scoop up an underdog before the odds start to flip. Then we have Miles Johns taking on John Sexy Mexi Castaneda. Miles Johns is 12-1 overall, 4-1 in his last 5, coming off of 2 knockout wins in a row. John Castaneda is 18-5 overall, 2-3 in his last 5, coming off a win over Eddie Weiland. Miles Johns is a good, strong grappler with heavy hands and explosive speed. The wrestling is the core of everything he does. He is coming off the 2nd KO win in a row, and those aren't ground and pound TKOs. Those are just straight up legit knockouts, which has been really impressive for him. John Sexy Mexi Castaneda is a really fun come forward fighter, and breaking down his tape is also fun because all of his fights, or most of his fights, are in Spanish, and then you just hear sexy, sexy, and then back to the Spanish. So it's just funny to watch those breakdowns and listen to the Spanish commentary on his fights. He's a very well-rounded fighter, and he sets an incredible pace. He loves coming forward with fast hands and then shooting takedowns when he has the opening. He does not have a ton of power, but he makes up for that with forward pressure and a wide variety of strikes. And this entire card has been stacked with fun fights from fighters that don't really have a ton of name recognition, but go out there and put on a show every time. And this is another one. Miles Johns' power and wrestling matched with Castaneda's pressure and toughness should be a ton of fun. I do think Johns gets it done, but I would like to see him wrestle and not hang out on his feet for too long with Castaneda, because even though Castaneda doesn't have a ton of power, he's busy and can absolutely get things done on his feet. So Miles is the pick, and I don't think we will be seeing the Sexy Mexi Raptor celebration. And depending on what the round line is, I will be looking at the over, betting the over on the rounds here, because while I think Miles Johns wins, John Castaneda is not an easy guy to put away. He is really, really tough. And I could absolutely see him, even if he's on like the wrong side of a complete beating, I can see him taking that beating and working his way to a decision. Then we have Danilo Marques and Jailton Almeida in sort of a battle of the grapplers. Danilo Marques is 11-3 overall, 4-1 in his last 5, coming off the stoppage loss to Kennedy and Chukwu. Jailton Almeida is 14-2 overall. He's 5-0 in his last 5, riding a 9-fight stoppage streak. Danilo Marques is a solid grappler with lots of takedowns and plenty of control. He does have technical boxing, but there isn't much power in his strikes, and his path to victory is grappling. If you watch the loss against Chukwu, he was okay in the striking exchanges. He dominated the grappling exchanges, and then he was knocked out at the very end of the fight because he was just a little too comfortable striking when he shouldn't have been. Jailton Almeida is the real deal. He's a great prospect right now. He has powerful hands, and he's actually considers himself a striker when the rest of us, it's very clear to us that he's a grappler. All of his wins are by stoppage, and that's because he is like a dog with a bone. He will come in hot and relentlessly work for takedowns, and once he's on the ground, he will chase submissions and hit you in those transitions. The issue, however, is he takes risks that he shouldn't, and he ends up getting swept. He ends up being put in positions. He ends up, being almost full mount and then ending up in somebody's guard. So he is absolutely submission over position, and that has gotten into some trouble in the past. And this fight feels like they're giving Almeida a fight that he can win, so he can sort of be the next big deal in this weight class. And I honestly agree that that's what the UFC is doing here. Danilo has solid grappling, but I don't think it's as good as Almeida's. What he does do better, though, is he has more control. He won't take those crazy risks. He will get control, stay there, lock it in, and then work a position. So Danilo can find himself sort of winning a scramble that Almeida created because he took a risk that he shouldn't have, and then stealing rounds. So I don't think Danilo has any stoppage potential, and he would need to avoid a lot of the bigger strikes on the feet. But Danilo could sneak out a win here with an overzealous Almeida taking risks. My pick is Almeida, but I think these odds are wide, especially if you consider the experience difference between the two of them. I understand Almeida has more fights, but not at this level. If you dig into those, a lot of those are sort of bottom feeder fights earlier in his career. So Almeida's the pick, but I think Danilo Marques can make this an ugly fight and capitalize on some of Almeida's, I'm going to call them mistakes, but him chasing submissions that aren't there. I can see Danilo Marques capitalizing on those, but I do see Danilo losing this fight. Then we've got Jason Witt fighting Philip Rowe. Jason Witt, 19-7 overall. He's 2-3 in his last 5, is coming off a win over Bryan Barberena. Philip Rowe is 8-3 overall, 4-1 in his last 5. Jason Witt is a wrestler and grinder who is only looking for takedowns and submissions. He has no intention on engaging in a kickboxing match, and that's fine because his stand-up is just okay, and his chin has been questioned in the past. When he gets on top, and I'm saying when and not if, because with averaging more than 6 takedowns per 15 minutes, it is inevitable that he will end up on top. And when he gets there, he has great control and pressure, which he uses to pound away. He's not really going to hunt for submissions, but if you squirm to avoid some of that top pressure, he will sneak something in there and snatch it up. Philip Rowe is very big for the division. You can see that here with his 5-inch height and 10-inch reach advantage. He's a high-volume striker and does a great job using his length and range. I say it all the time on this show. I don't really care when a fighter has a reach advantage because most fighters don't use it well. But Philip Rowe is actually one of the few fighters that uses his range really well and that sort of reach advantage really, really well. His ground game is fantastic, but his wrestling could use some work, so he doesn't really get fights there on his own. Rowe's the favorite here, and I totally understand why. He's the better striker. He has the better jiu-jitsu skills. He's definitely the more dangerous guy in this fight. But I've seen Rowe struggle to get out from underneath people in the past. And I think Witt's submission defense is solid enough to where he can hang out on top without really getting submitted or being threatened with a submission there. The big question mark is the striking. But I actually think the height difference will benefit Witt because I can see Philip Rowe being too tall, too long, and Jason Witt literally just biting down on his mouthpiece, even though his chin is not fantastic. I can see him just biting down on his mouthpiece and just diving at those legs. And there's plenty of leg to get to because Philip Rowe is so tall. So I like Jason Witt as an underdog in this fight to just shoot relentless takedowns, avoid getting knocked out, avoid submissions on top, and just being super, super busy and riding out a win. So I'm going with the underdog, Jason Witt, in this matchup. Then we have Marc-Andre Barriault versus Chidi Njokuani. Marc-Andre Barriault is 20-7 overall, 2-2-1 in his last 5. Chidi Njokuani is 13-4 overall, 3-2 in his last 5, coming off of a solid Contender Series win. Marc-Andre is a pretty well-rounded fighter with solid kickboxing and takedowns. If you decide to brawl with him, he will happily get sucked into a brawl. Just watch his fight against the Zaitar. His jiu-jitsu is solid, but his takedowns can use some work. Marc-Andre is typically looking to pressure forward and wear you down on your feet and beat you up from there, but he can mix it up if he needs to because I mentioned he's very well-rounded. Chidi Njokuani is a very good striker with speed, power, and solid distance control. He's not a high-volume guy, but he sticks and moves really well. His feet are never in the same place for a long period of time, and people have a really hard time getting to him. If you are able to get inside his reach and work your way to his legs, you can have success with takedowns, with jiu-jitsu. And I would list this fight as a sort of striker versus striker because I do consider Barriault as a striker, even though he can grapple. And grappling is actually his path here. Because if he chases Chidi with strikes, I think Chidi lights him up. I think that elusive stick and move, I think he absolutely, if you come charging at Chidi Njokuani, throwing strikes and running forward, I think it's just blast, move, and he just absolutely lights you up rushing in. And we've all seen when you're rushing in, you are very susceptible to catch a solid one on the chin, and your own forward pressure will not do you any favors. So the path to victory here for Marc-Andre, I think, is the grappling and the wrestling and the jiu-jitsu because I think there's a massive gap between the two of them on the ground. And I have to assume that Marc-Andre Barriault is smart enough and prepared enough to have a grappling game plan. There's a very clear path to victory for Marc-Andre Barriault. And I think I may throw a money line bet on him because of that. I'll look a little closer. I think I'm going to money line Marc-Andre here. Again, I just have to trust that he's going to grapple. If they strike, I don't think it's an absolute, he's 100% going to lose if they strike. I just think if he starts chasing Chidi, it's going to be a problem for him. It's going to be a long night. And I don't know why you would do that when there's an alternative path that's very clear. So Marc-Andre's the pick. Hopefully he wrestles, even though he's not primarily a wrestler, because there's a solid path to victory for him there. In our co-main event of the evening, we have Punahele Soriano versus Nick Maximov. Punahele Soriano is 8-1 overall, 4-1 in his last 5, coming off the first loss of his career. Nick Maximov is 7-0 overall, 5-0 in his last 5, coming off a decision win just a few months ago. Punahele Soriano is a striker who has tons of power and could put most people out on their feet. He can also wrestle and has 4 takedowns in the UFC, which includes 3 against Jamie Pickett in his Contender Series win. He's listed as having a 100% takedown defense, but he has literally only defended 1 single shot in the UFC, and that was against Brendan Allen. So that number is a bit inflated. Nick Maximov is a very solid BJJ guy who knows what he's good at, and he sticks with it. His striking is pretty raw, and his takedowns are just okay. Nick is an interesting guy because most of his fights were against guys with losing records. Then he got a Contender Series win at heavyweight, and now he's settled into middleweight, working his way up the food chain. And it's an interesting matchup because it is absolutely striker versus grappler, and we have not seen Punahele's grappling tested. We saw him get completely outclassed by Brendan Allen on his feet, which was surprising to most people. But there wasn't much grappling in that fight. We also haven't seen Nick Maximov spend much time striking because in his fight against Cody Brundage, he had 4 takedowns and only landed 14 strikes in that entire fight. I think the odds are correct where they stand, and Punahele's a 2-1 favorite. But if this gets to the ground, I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up looking like a 2-1 dog. I think whoever wins this fight ends up looking like a massive favorite, meaning I think Punahil either blows through Nick Maximov, just dominates him with the striking and makes him look like an amateur, or Nick Maximov takes down Punahil and just smokes him on the ground, making him look like an amateur. Punahil's the pick because every single round has to start on the feet, but I don't love the pick. I wish I had more of Punahil defending takedowns and grappling and avoiding submissions, but I just don't. But Punahil is the pick because I still think Nick Maximov is just too raw. I think he's just too raw here, and I think if he gets cracked in the mouth a few times and gets stuffed 1 or 2 times in the takedowns, he's going to have a really hard time. So I like Punahil Soriano to win this fight. And that brings us to the main event of the evening. We have Jack Hermansson fighting Sean Strickland. Jack Hermansson, 22-6 overall, 3-2 in his last 5, alternating wins and losses. Sean Strickland, 24-3 overall. He's 5-0 in his last 5, and he's coming off of a grappling loss in December. Not in the UFC, just a straight-up fun grappling match that he did. He did lose that. So take that for what it is, considering he's fighting a grappler in this fight. Jack Hermansson is a great grappler. If he takes you down, he's pretty dominant from there. His striking is solid, but he's not going to be KOing anybody anytime soon. What I like about Jack is that he will stick to a game plan and he will have success. He took Shabazian down 3 times in a win, Martin Vettori down twice in a loss, Jacare Souza down 3 times in a win, and he's just not afraid to put himself in harm's way to get takedowns and make something happen. He knows his skill set and he sticks with it. Sean Strickland is a blue-collar striker. He just walks forward and throws a ton of punches. He doesn't have incredible power, but it is deceiving because he'll land jabs that seem to do real damage, and he'll land straights that are really touching people up, even though there's 0 hip rotation behind any of these strikes, and they are just 100% coming from his arms. He does have a fantastic takedown defense at 81%, and what's even more impressive about that is that it is newer, meaning earlier in his career, you could have taken him down, and taking him down was a path to victory, where later in his career, he really closed those gaps, and his takedown defense has held up. And on top of that, he added takedown offense because in that win against Uriah Faber a few months ago, he had 4 of his own takedowns. And this is an interesting fight because for a little while now, I personally have thought that Sean Strickland is a bit overrated. Just watching a guy walking forward, throwing like lackadaisical punches from his arms and not his hips, I just wasn't impressed. But it is impossible to not be impressed with this guy, with the streak that he's put together, the volumes he's putting, the things he's doing are very, very impressive, regardless of how you feel about his social media presence. And I know that Hermansson isn't exactly the number 1 contender, in the division, but I do think he's an opponent that won't be comfortable just standing in front of Sean Strickland and just handing over a decision like we've seen some other fighters do. I like Hermansson here to push a grappling pace and non-stop looking for takedowns. The issue is, I don't know if it's enough. I have to go with Sean Strickland because I think Hermansson is submission or bust sometimes, where Sean can turn the tables and ride out a decision by mixing in takedowns, as well as the way that he did against Uriah Hall. And if I didn't see the Uriah Hall fight, I actually do think Hermansson would be my pick. But watching Sean Strickland outstrike Uriah Hall, take down Uriah Hall, it just added a whole new layer to his game. And as much as I want to see him lose, and I don't know why I'm hating on the guy, but as much as I want to see him lose, Jack Hermansson, I don't think he's going to be the guy to do it. He will come forward. I don't think he's going to engage in the striking. He's going to look for the grappling. It's very possible he gets a takedown and a submission, but I think he'll get frustrated, and I think over time, those million jabs and those million straight punches are just going to touch his face up, beat him up, slow him down, and the grappling will be less and less effective as the fight goes on. So I do like Sean Strickland here. Take a closer look. Maybe maybe I'll find a bet here that makes some sense. But right now, the polarizing on social media, Sean Strickland is the pick. Guys, if you want 50 free bucks, go to wewantpicks.com/bets. Sign up with any one of our 5 betting partners. Make a deposit. Let me know, and I'll send you $50. You want to sign up for all 5? Great. I'll send you $250. wewantpicks.com/bets. I'll see you for our full card breakdown with Jacob and multiple perspectives.